Okay, so hello everyone. Some of you may know me. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about a lot of graph, a lot of search and machine learning, and now AI, and a lot of other things on that channel. But I also have a day job where I also do a lot of these things as well. So I'm kind of going to be moshing a little bit of those things together today to show you kind of like what other people are trying to do to see if their graph is trustworthy, because some of us already have graphs, and if you don't have a graph yet, you probably want to make sure that it's trustworthy when you do. So that is what we're going to be talking about right now, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to go get started. Okay, I hope everyone can see my screen. Please let me know if you cannot. Because I'm kind of a dual purpose here, I have my information for my day job and my night job. It's not really a job. I just teach on YouTube for free, but that's funny enough where most people know me from. So there is some of my information and what I'm all about. Do not worry about looking at all of this. This is kind of a lot. I'm hoping I can send these slides out. This is really just more information, some cherry-picked things that I would recommend if you want to learn more about knowledge graphs and AI and how they interplay. So these are just reading materials, learning materials, those sorts of things. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. So let's set the stage here for a second. If we are trying to trust our graph more, right? We've been using graphs here and there, throughout the years, but now because we can see, and you've heard a lot about that in this whole conference, which is graph is really helpful to have for AI, for grounding purposes, for trustworthy purposes, for being able to do explainability and a lot of other things. So setting the stage as to what are we trying to avoid by doing some of these things. And then we'll get into a small little mini example that you all can try yourself, and we can kind of see what that verified graph looks like for grounding purposes in AI responses, and that's using RAG, of course. And then we're going to get into architecture. And this is just a sample architecture. Of course, you all have information that you all have, systems you all have, legacy stuff, or you have nothing yet. Maybe you're, just getting started. That's okay. This is really just a sample for you to kind of start to think through how you can build in verification to your knowledge graph, either as you are building the knowledge graph or on existing data already, and what that looks like. So what are we trying to avoid here? These are the concerns, and a lot of these are from the press. And you can see here, AI obviously can make some things up. Main reason for that, of course, is it either doesn't have the information or the information doesn't really agree. There's a lot of mixing and matching, which is actually the last bullet on here, which is when there are differences of opinion, sometimes the AI has to pick a winner that it's going to use in its generation. Probably not something you want to leave up just to the AI itself, especially when you are doing things for a specific business or enterprise or use case. The AI, if you're just getting it right out of the box, it's a pre-trained model. It doesn't know anything about your stuff specifically. You can obviously train it up and do those things. Again, be cautious how you're doing all of that, but that's really where the making things up comes from. It's also sometimes vague because it doesn't have enough context, or it's a very sensitive topic to the outside world, and it has to be very specific and cautious in its response, but maybe internally you need a hard-hitting response, especially like if you're doing something with HR, you have to be like, this is what the rule is, not like, well, maybe, sort of, kind of, maybe. And I put some little things in here that might be funny. Hopefully you all find it funny. I'm not going to go through all of it as we go, but I put it in here for some humor. That is just my style. AI does need to know more about your specific use cases. If you have specific rules on the sandwich stealers of your organization, it doesn't know about those things yet. You have to teach it about those things, or you have to build it into a structure for that matter, way of grounding what the AI is then responding with. Can be biased sometimes, oftentimes, depending on what you're talking about, and then the winner issue that does crop up quite a bit. Now, I focus a lot in my day job on research topics. So if you're thinking about like stuff that people are writing research papers about, There's a lot of different ways to do research. There's a lot of different findings in research. They don't always agree. In fact, that's how most articles get written. So if you think about my use case for AI, you got to have a way to help the picking of winner piece to the AI. And you also have to have a lot of trustworthiness. And honestly, that goes for any organization. I think if you're using AI to do any internal stuff, if you're doing things to talk to customers or make decisions on, you really need to have a higher degree of trust in those things. So what, oh, I'm going the wrong way. Hold on. I wasn't looking down at my keyboard. What do we want to support? That's what we're on now. So there are a few different ways that you can do verification with knowledge graph data. So one that is going to be presented a little bit in this. I'm just going to walk through it. I have a lot more detail. Of course, we don't have time to go through all of it. But that's where maybe you can go watch my channel. I have some publications that I'm going to be putting out on some of these topics as well. So rule-based is if you have data governance, if you have any other kind of rule sets, quality scripts, entity resolution, how you do merge and dedupe processes, all of those things can probably help you go through in an automated way for the first time around on your graph and figure out, hey, we have a bunch of customers and they all kind of sort of have similar names, almost the same name. Do you have an entity resolution process? Okay, we'll go do that. And then your graph will be better, because when the AI is looking at this from a grounding perspective for that RAG process, you don't want it to have to figure out, okay, I have 5 entities and they all might be the right one. I got to pick a winner now, which we want to avoid. We'll go into some more rule-based things in the verification process that I am going to talk about later on in the presentation. You also have LLMs can actually go in and check themselves, right? You just have to be careful with that, because especially if you're looking at your institution, if your institutional knowledge, you might not have documentation on that knowledge. Who here has the best documentation ever in their organization? Raise your hand. No one is raising their hand. And if you are, you need to go and talk to someone and really find out if that's true, because it's usually not. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that's not codified in a way that you can then put into an AI so that it understands your context. So having the LLM check its own quality, it can get you a certain degree, but you really do need to have additional measures, right? So you can mix and match all of these. Human in the loop, that's really making sure that what is in your graph is being verified, especially when there's disputes in, maybe you're deriving this stuff from your content or from, your R&D programs, and, maybe there's different findings across the board. You probably need a subject matter expert to weigh in on some of those things to make sure that you're not going to be putting things out that are a little fuzzy for really important things. There's also like society and membership SMEs. So that would be like, if you're, I'm just naming some that I am familiar with because I used to work for some of them, like IEEE, SAE, ASTM, like a bunch of those societies of engineers, the ones that I was talking about. But there's lots of societies for a lot of different topics. They might be able to help with some of this verification, especially if you're doing something that would benefit the larger community. You have crowdsourcing, and that's from a survey perspective. And then you have crowdsourced from a behavioral perspective. And that's where, instead of sending out a survey, you're actually just seeing what humans are engaging with, or the feedback of the follow-up questions are, to then help improve things and verify them. So here is a way that you can do this yourself. So I went through, and this is just to test the difference between what fact verification can do to the LLM process, right? So you have here, I tested it on 6 different LLM models, and I didn't do anything to those. Those are just the openly available ones, no fancy things done. And I was testing on a very basic query here, and that is, what is the recommended vitamin C dose for cancer patients who are in chemotherapy treatment? Then went in and did the process that we're going to talk about in this presentation to get verified facts. And then I added that into the mix with GraphRag. Yes, thank you, Neo, for doing all those lovely things that you do so I could go and do some of those things. When you're doing that, you can add that verification. And so it's not just you have these embeddings of authoritative information from your organization or from trusted sources, but now you're actually taking another step and you're verifying which ones are accurate because they don't always agree. And sometimes, they're just fuzzy. They're not specific enough. So let's see what happened. So from my mini example from GraphRag, I pulled out some of the statements and I went in and verified them, added some quad structures because that's how you do the verification piece. You put a quad on it. And going through, I want to highlight, there's 3 areas here that are in bold. And I am not going to try to say that drug name because I am not a medical person. So what ended up happening from the text that we were gathering that GraphRag information from, there were things that were missing that after human verification, we had subject matter experts say, well, wait a minute, vitamin C, and you'll see an example here in a second, vitamin C doesn't actually have negative repercussions on just general cancer patients. There's a specific context that's missing here. And then they supplied a new document that had that context that was missing. And then we added that in and we got these 2 bold statements that are now verified because an SME verified it and added that context in. So we actually corrected some things in the graph and made it more specific. The next part that you can see is kind of bold is the 4 to 10 unit piece. That was a dispute amongst all of the text that we were looking at in this example. And so by going in and getting those statements out and having an SME, a subject matter expert, verify which is accurate, we added that in as a verified statement to help with the response. And we're going to see what that looks like. So this is one of the best. So again, this is not talking about model quality, not trying to poke at different models. That's why I took all the model names out of this. But this was the best one, and it didn't do bad, right? It did not do bad. And you can see some of the annotations that I added in here just from human perspective, so you can read a little bit of what happened. And you can see here that 3 facts, this is the same query that went across all of them. And I didn't do any fine tuning. I did nothing else to these to just see an apples to apples kind of comparison. So there are 3 facts that we can now verify. Now, this is interesting. We did not do grounding, right? There's no local verified grounding. Now, I mean, of course, the LLM on the back end could be doing grounding on its own. I'm just kind of saying whatever is out there on the open web is what I'm using here. But I know locally, my specific graph that I have that is verified, I did not use that to do grounding here. However, because I have that, I can go back and see how trustworthy was the response that I got from the LLM. So it's kind of like a post-process piece, but it's still valuable. So even if you don't have all the resources and all the time in the world, right, to set up GraphRag and do all of that, although it sounds like Neo is putting great stuff out that we can all do that in a faster way. So that's great. But, let's say you don't have the time to do that right about now. This is, you still have that value of having that knowledge graph, having the verified statements so that you can make sure that what you're doing is more accurate and trustworthy than what you could have had from before. Now, the interesting thing was there are 3 responses in here that are kind of vague. And when it comes to things that you're doing in the research space, you need really precise answers. And so that's why, while these are not necessarily wrong, because they're so vague, they could be taken out of context. There could be a lot of interpretation. It's not specific enough. And so therefore, it could still result in misinformation or inaccuracies. Now, let's look at my local verified graph. So use the same model, except I used GraphRag. So we have those embeddings in there. And then I also took the verified facts that I had, and that was the corrections that I mentioned that we got from the subject matter experts who reviewed some of those things that were low quality or low confidence, I should say. And then we also have the other verified statements that we had just from a citation metric perspective. So that's another thing that we've done, right, in this example, where you can actually look at how much corroborating evidence is there in the world to support the claims from some of the graph rag that is being exposed. And so that's the other piece that we added into this, where you can look at, is there corroborating evidence? Are there, a lot of other sources that agree with this statement? You can automatically verify some of those things. Again, like there's some things that you will always want a human to verify, but in this case, we were looking at some of these vitamin C dosages, and there was just such overwhelming evidence in one side. It was automatically verified, whereas there was another one we needed human in the loop to actually do. But you can see here, we have 6. I did nothing else at all other than just the things I just mentioned. I did nothing fancy. And so you can see here, we can now verify there are 6 facts here. They're very pointed, right? And they're very specific. And you can see here the 10 grams per infusion. If you remember back to the graph rag verification that we had, that was one of those between 4 and 10. So we can see, aha, that is more specific than anything else we got. And we know it's verified. It's trusted. That's great. And you can see some of these other ones where that correction to that specific drug interaction with vitamin C was captured, and we can see it here in the response. Now, it's not perfect either, right? Like, full transparency, there's still 2 responses that are too vague, but this is a super tiny mini example. So, of course, when you do this at scale, and we know this for a fact from actually doing it in production and others that are doing this research, the model might get worse before it gets better, but then you have all of these other pieces that are coming in to make it a little bit better as you go. So maybe these things can be fine-tuned if they are important enough, or you get more data to support these, those types of things that go with any model that you're running. Okay, so I didn't do this just with one model. I actually did it with a few. I took the model names out, but interestingly, I told you I used the best one from the out-of-the-box LLMs, but some of them had some really inaccurate stuff, which again, it's not surprising. We already knew that was going to happen. And there's some things in here that we can see that were unverified, which again is fine. That just means if I did this at a larger scale, I would probably get more of those statements in, have more verification, so we would know those are more trustworthy. So those don't mean good or bad. It just means we don't know, which is a risk. So, you have to take that into consideration. And then the vagaries. Vagary, again, is not necessarily good or bad. It means that there is a risk. And so if you're doing some risk mitigation, those are areas you might want to focus on. So through this process, I was actually really surprised, because I, as a graph person, was like, great, I have verified facts, and that's going to be, the main thing. But it's like, actually, there were a few other findings from this. And again, this was a bigger study than what you're seeing here. So verified facts obviously are increasing that trustworthiness, because there's either corroborating evidence behind that statement, or you have SMEs who are trusted and verified themselves as like experts in the field or whatever it might be, who have gone in and done that verification. Graph structures are really important, because when we were doing the walking the graph, that's how we hopped around to understand that vitamin C had this interaction with that cancer drug, and that cancer drug was used in chemotherapy. So that graph structure and walking the graph actually was helpful in this exercise. Additional context, of course, helps limit that vague inaccuracy stuff that's out there. So in research, it's really important to have trustworthy facts if you're making a lot of big decisions on things. And I'm not just talking about like academic research. I'm saying like your R&D departments. I once worked in the aerospace manufacturing space, and let me tell you, if your airplane has a problem in it, it's a bad thing, right? Like these are things that are real world complications. All right, so how do we do this for prime time? So obviously you have a graph that is built, and it's either straight out of graph rag, and you really do need to go through with a fine-tooth comb, make sure that it understands your context, your business, your use cases, take out things that don't necessarily need to be there, because if there's a bunch of extra data, it could be correct, but that's going to drive your latency down if you don't actually or latency up, I should say, and your accuracy down potentially, because it's more stuff your AI has to look at. So, keep that in mind. But building out that graph is a very big first step to all of this. I'm not going to go through this because I'm sure you've seen the RAG process a million times already at the conference. I've seen it a few times already, so you understand how this works. This is the full architecture. So you can see there is the automation step, and then there's the human verification step. So I'm going to go through each of those. And I have a link here. Just go to my YouTube channel. I have a longer video walkthrough of this if you are interested in it. So for the automation, I had mentioned that citation analysis, at least for the discipline that I'm looking at, is really helpful because you have all that corroborating evidence. People are citing each other, and you have people disputing what somebody else said. So you have a lot of really rich information that you have to consult to see, like, well, what's going on out there in the space. Now, I will be very clear, everything I'm talking about right now, I was using open access stuff as experimentation. So, just keep that in mind. You have to ask permission to do this stuff with anyone's content. Just keep that in mind. And so what I was looking at is, like, there's this source list, which we know from some of the things that have come out in the news, a lot of the big LLM providers do. They look at that source list of all the things that they can gather data from, and some are higher quality or more trustworthy or more timely or whatever it might be on their scale. And so I just did a rough estimate of, there's H indexes and other things that are in the citation space. So I just used some of those. And then you can see which of those statements agree more often or disagree. And you can see here, statement 1 has a lot of corroborating evidence from highly trusted sources, whereas statement 2 and 3, and especially 4, are like a little bit scarier. And so that would then decrease the confidence. So all of that goes into the automation of verification. And of course, like, there's this big bubble of things, which is if it's something that can harm someone, if it's brand damaging, if it's a sensitive topic, personal information kind of stuff, that has to have more checks and balances on it if you were doing automation. In this case, we're not working with that kind of data, so we were not using that. And then that's where you start to rank the trustworthiness. So for things like in scholarship, like, how many other people were citing something, is it timely? All of those things kind of bake into the algorithm of trustworthiness score for an automation to happen. But then some things are just highly disputed, or there's not enough data to corroborate a statement. And that's where you need subject matter experts to really weigh in. And so here you can see, this is just one example of doing SME feedback, where these would get automatically pushed into a human in the loop process, where a AI is generating these prompt and tasks, and you can use things like Mechanical Turk or your own survey method to push it out to customers or users or whoever it might be that you're sending this to. And this is automatically generated, and it's populating with the 2 statements that disagree, or the statements that have low confidence, and there's not enough corroborating evidence, whatever it is that you want to send to human verification. And so you can see here, avoid vitamin C if you're on radiation therapy or chemotherapy, a direct statement that we found from text. That's not specific enough, though, and so that's not verified. The second one is verified because there's tons of data that already supports that. But after the SMEs got in, they said, well, wait a minute. That first statement isn't actually wrong. It's just not specific enough. And so when someone is saying that, we do require that evidence is provided so that we know they're not just, making it up, even though they are verified subject matter experts. Some people just have a bad day and maybe they don't do the right thing. And it's also a good way of gathering new sources that you want to license or consult or look at from an AI perspective, so that you can add more of that into your graph and then help with more verification. And so here, this is saying that this specific cancer drug is the actual problem. And so we can go back into the graph, get rid of that old statement, this first one, avoid vitamin C if you're on blah, 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 and make it very specific to this specific cancer drug. And that makes it more trustworthy because we verified it. We know these are for authoritative sources, and we've now corrected the graph, so it's more trustworthy. Okay, so I wanted to make sure I had some time to look at the questions too, but here's how to get a hold of me if you are interested in talking to me. Like I said, I have the YouTube channel if you want to go look at that. I'm very active on LinkedIn. All of my emails, all of my things are here if you want to go and check it out. I know this is very fast. It's only 30 minutes, but I'm sure I will be seeing all of you at some point somewhere. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm just going to be on camera, sorry. And I'm going to look at the questions, see if there's any. All right, I don't see any questions. So, all right, so with that, I mean, you have 2 minutes to spare. I went really fast though. So now is your time. If you have any questions, please put it into Q&A or chat, and I can answer what you have. All right, I don't see anybody coming in. That's okay. All right, so thank you all. I think weirdly enough, this says 9 minutes to go, but there is no way I have 9 minutes because I'm looking at the clock and we started 30 minutes ago. So I don't know where that came from. Oh, thank you. I'm looking at everybody saying thank you. Thank you. So glad you enjoyed it. I hope this is helpful. All right, and I'm going to stick around for the rest of the conference. So if you have any questions, you can find me. Just go ahead and answer away. And yeah, I am the same Ashley from the panel earlier. I just got a haircut in the meantime. Awesome. All right, I'm going off camera, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference.